Hello and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today our special guest author is Frank Anthony Polito, whose new book is Renovated to Death. Before we begin, I do want to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of the new book, and we were happy to hold one for you to pick up or put one in the mail. Just give us a call or go online. And I would like to welcome Frank.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm always fascinated by how authors get to where they're at, kind of their backstory. So can you tell us a little bit about who Frank was before he became a writer?
Yes, and I'll try to make it short because I always say long answer short and then I talk for days. But I was an actor.
Okay.
My partner and I, we met in college at Wayne State University. We were both theater majors, and we moved to New York City when we were 25 to pursue careers in acting. And about 6 years into that, I was working with a theater company and we started to write our own plays. So I wrote a play because as a gay actor in the 90s, there weren't a lot of opportunities. If there were, you couldn't be out and there weren't a lot of gay roles, and the ones that were there were usually going to straight actors anyway. So I wrote a play that story that I would like to appear in if I had the opportunity. So I wrote a play about a pair of gay boys growing up in the 80s who were best friends in a small town in Michigan. And the play was produced. And if there are any theater aficionados out there, there's an actor by the name of John Tartaglia who made his way in a musical called Avenue Q. He played the character that was based on me. And then fast forward a few years later, I went to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon for playwriting. And before I went to school for playwriting, I was working, I had a day job working at Kensington Publishing, where I met an editor by the name of John Scognamilio. And I went to say goodbye and told John I was going off to playwriting school. And he said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a playwright." And I told him about the play I had written. I had written one play. And he said, "That sounds interesting. Could I read the play?" And he read the play and he said, "I think this would really make for a great novel. So when you get out of graduate school, get in touch with me and, we'll get to work on it." And I had met so many people in my life who said, they would help me, and they never did. But right when I finished 2 years later, John reached out to me and he said, "Do you want to write that book?" And so I took my play called Band Fags and I turned it into a novel that was published in 2008. And then I wrote a sequel in 2009, won a Lambda Literary Award for Best Gay Romance. And then I took some time off. I self-published a couple books. I really wanted to write young adult, and Kensington was not publishing young adult at the time. So I self-published a novel called Lost in the 90s about a kid from 2012 who travels back in time to 1994 and meets his parents who are in high school. And then I wrote another book in 2013, and then I took 9 years off, didn't write, gave it up. My partner and I moved back to Michigan, bought a house, got a dog. I tried doing the responsible adult thing. See what I mean? Long story short. I tried doing the responsible thing, but it wasn't very fun. And in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, I was literally unemployed for a year. And John Scognamilio got in touch with me and he said, "I had this idea for a gay cozy mystery about a couple. And I think the story of you and your partner, Craig, moving back to Michigan and renovating your house, if we throw in a dead body, we could turn it into something." And so now here we are with Renovated to Death, book one in the Domestic Partners in Crime Cozy Mystery series.
I think it's fair to say that in this case, art imitates life. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book?
Well, it's the story of a millennial couple. Greg and I, we are not a millennial couple, but they wanted specifically a millennial couple because there's this push, nowadays to attract younger readers to cozies. And I have a lot of friends who are actually millennials. My character in the book, his name is Peter. And I say that he suffers from Peter Pan syndrome because I do. I refuse to grow up. But in the book, Peter is a writer of mysteries. His partner, JP, is an actor. They had been living in New York. They decide to in their mid 30s to move back to Michigan, where Peter is from, buy a house, get a dog, renovate the house. But one of the draws for JP, the actor, is that he has a friend who's a TV producer, and she works for a network called Home Design Television, HD TV, and she pitches a show for them to host while they renovate this house. So they do that on season 1. It's a big hit. When this book opens, they're getting ready to start season 2. They need to find a house. There's an empty house down the block from where they live, sitting empty. They get in touch with the owners, who are a pair of older 50-year-old gay twin brothers who own this house that they grew up in, but their parents have died. It's been sitting empty for the last 25 years. One of the brothers, Tom, he's a business owner. He owns a local gay nightclub, decides it's time to sell. They're wasting it just sitting there, that he needs some money. So he offers the house. The partners start to get to work on it. And when they go over one morning to meet with Tom, they find him lying dead at the bottom of the rickety old staircase. Of course, like in most cozies, the police think, nobody ever gets killed in this quaint little town. It's an accident. He must have slipped and fallen. But they begin to see indicators that there was some foul play involved. And using Peter using his skills as a mystery writer, and JP using his skills playing a former cop on a TV cop show, they set out to solve this mystery in this little town of Pleasant Woods, which is a Detroit suburb.
Now, you yourself grew up around Detroit, and you have some experience purchasing historic homes. Did that kind of influence your decision to write the book the way it is written?
Yes, well, every story, every book I've written, I set it in the Detroit area because it's just easier to write what you know.
Okay.
I've only ever lived in the Detroit area, New York, or Pittsburgh, where I went to graduate school. And the idea for the house renovation, my editor specifically asked for that. And since I know something about that, write what you know, like I said to someone else, I wouldn't write a story about a professional baseball player because I know nothing about that. But I used, so I got to write about doing for the past 9 years, put it in the head of the narrator, and now he gets to tell all about what he's been doing, which is exactly what I've done. They live in the exact same house we live in. If you read the book and you came to visit, you would see everything that is detailed in the book. On my Instagram page, I've actually been posting pictures of the renovation projects over the years, and the furniture, the antique furniture that we've purchased online and various antique auctions, and that I describe in detail in the book. You can see it all right there on Instagram.
You include some home renovation tips as part of your mystery. If someone was considering buying a historic home, what's the #1 piece of advice you'd give them?
I know there are 3. I can't remember which order they're in,
Okay.
but one I know is hire someone to do something you can do yourself. And I say that not because it's expensive, because it is, but if you really can do it yourself, I believe, you should, because corny as it sounds, like, to know my home sort of on an intimate level with every piece of wood that I've refinished. I can see, in different rooms that they've obviously used, the wood was cut from the same tree because it matches in the wood grain. And I just feel like it gives you better appreciation for the craftsmanship and what was done to make this home the way it is. You also feel a sense of history of the people who have lived there before you. Craig and I are very fortunate. We're only the 3rd family who's lived in our house in almost 100 years. So when we got it, it was still in pretty original shape. All of the woodwork is still intact. There aren't a lot of layers of paint on the walls. We do have one room where they wallpapered and then painted over it. So we need to figure out how we're going to get that off. But I just think if you can do it yourself, don't tear off a porch and try to rebuild it if you can't. But painting, refinishing woodwork, changing the light switch plates, just simple things like that. Number two is never paint over natural wood, because why? We do actually have one room that has been painted over, and I hate it. And I hate it even more because whoever did it used lead paint.
Oh.
I tested it. After trying to sand it off, I thought, well, maybe, I should, why am I getting a headache? And then I decided maybe I should do a little test, and I got one of those things, and sure enough, it turned red. So that's, a project in itself, but like, I don't understand why you have this. I mean, I get the reasoning behind it. Back in the day, people wanted to lighten up their homes and make them feel bright and airy, but I just feel like if you are fortunate enough to find a historic home that has natural wood, don't paint over it, because once you do, getting it off, I mean, you can get it off. I've gone around, we have picture rails in our home that were painted over, and I painstakingly scraped them off using a heat gun, and it was, I was able to do it, but save yourself a headache. And then the third one, what is it? Never paint over natural wood, never do something. Oh, if you're going to do something, do it right. And I learned that one the hard way, because when we moved in, I wasn't that savvy yet. And I did some things, like we have all of the original light switches, like the literal inside plugs. And when you turn them on, they make this like loud noise, and it's just the thing. And when I first moved in, I was like, oh, I'm going to get rid of all of those. And I started changing them out in a few rooms. And now you flip the switch and it's just like this little soft click. And I feel like something's missing. And why would I want to take away, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I think I saved those plugs, and I'm hoping that I'll have the chance to go back and actually put them in, because there's nothing wrong with them, and they've been in the house for 90 years. So new is not always better.
That's true.
Like we had hinges that were all corroded and rusted and whatever, and I took those off and I put on new ones. And then when I did that, all of a sudden my doors wouldn't close because something shifted, and I ended up having to like sand off the top of one of the doors so that I could get the closet shut. And now I'm kicking myself, because if I would have done it the right way and like figured out a way to level the door or adjust the door, they have those little wood shims that are behind the hinges, those little wood pieces or whatever. And I took those out, and they were there for a reason. And I learned the hard way. And now I have like a door that's shaved down on the top, and I live in fear that in 100 years from now, someone's going to find that door and say, what was that person thinking by shaving the top of it down, just so they could get it to close.
Renovated to Death is being marketed, positioned as a cozy mystery, as you've said. How would you define a cozy mystery as an author?
Well, I'll tell you and everyone right up front, I had never read a cozy mystery before I wrote this book. I knew what they were from my days of working and freelance working at Kensington Publishing years ago, and I always felt like they were for little old ladies, books that my grandmother would read. And it's not that I didn't enjoy mysteries. Growing up, I read Encyclopedia Brown and I read the Hardy Boys, but I wanted to read stories about boys like myself. And the majority of the cozy mysteries are about women, written by women, about women, always an older woman, but usually a woman of a certain age, middle age, whatever that means anymore. And she usually has a real job. She owns a bakery, or she owns an antique shop or a bookstore or whatever. And then someone dies and she finds herself being an amateur sleuth and solving the mystery, like Murder, She Wrote. And I had never even watched Murder, She Wrote, because growing up, it was on television when I was a teenager, but my grandfather watched it with my mother, and I just had no interest. So once I got the opportunity to write this book, my editor sent me a stack of cozies, and I dived in and I watched Angela Lansbury religiously. And I tried to take those things. It's a small town setting, a cast of characters, lots of tropes, the busybody, the neighborhood gossip, you know, the divorcee, the businessman, what have you. But I also really just wanted to write a Frank Anthony Polito style novel that involved a mystery. However, I had never written a book with a character over the age of like 22. So for me, this was a bit of a departure. They're in their mid 30s, but Peter is a perpetual teenager. So I just wrote him the way I write everyone else.
Since you made Peter an author of a mystery series for young readers, was that your way of kind of indulging in your own love of childhood mysteries?
Yeah, I specifically made him a young adult mystery writer because he's also a best-selling author, which I hope to, you know, follow in his footsteps one day. But I did it because I just have this affinity for young adult literature. I just love it so much. I think there's something about having characters who don't have to go to work every day and worry about things like paying the mortgage and being responsible adults. So I wrote, he had 4 books that are published, and they're about a teenage detective named TJ Inkster, and he's a gay teen detective. And I would really one day love to, I don't know how this would work because Kensington doesn't publish YA, but write those books.
Mhm.
Like it would say Peter Penwell on the cover of the book, but I would actually be the author. Or it would have a false cover where you open the real cover and then the inside is whatever that book is called. You know, so I'm living vicariously through my character.
You could be the Lemony Snicket of the mystery genre for teens.
From your lips to whoever's ears, please. I just think it's, you know, and I like that fun, that humor that's in the cozy, where you like, I intentionally, it's so weird for me because in my earlier books, which were set in the 80s and the 90s, it's pop culture on every page. I've been accused of, you know, like putting that in there intentionally to, you know, to show my knowledge or to show off or whatever. And that's not it. That as a kid, everything is movies, song titles, actors, actresses, you know, culture. And in this book, I actually intentionally chose to not mention any, I do mention a few things that are real, but I intentionally made up things like they love to watch a TV show called America's Next Top Drag Superstar.
Mm-hmm.
I could have said RuPaul's Drag Race, but
Yeah.
I wanted it to be fun because I want the readers to like laugh and chuckle and know what I'm talking about, but I call it something else. That's why I didn't say HGTV, it's on HDTV. Plus, you know, I don't want HGTV to get
the
mad at
lawsuit
me.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I just want to make it fun and so that people will, like even Pleasant Woods, a lot of people might not know this, not being from here, it's not a real town. I live in Pleasant Ridge. The town next to us is Huntington Woods. I chose to combine the two. All of the other towns are combinations. I grew up in Hazel Park next to Madison Heights. In my book, it's Madison Park and Royal Heights. I just wanted it to be fun. I wanted anyone who reads the book who lives in the Detroit area to chuckle and know what I'm talking about. Cabot Cove is not a real place.
No, people may look for it, but it's not real. I think you have captured kind of the cozies are on the lighter side of the mystery genre. They're not as dark as the PI novels and things like that. So that comes across in your book. And I think you're right that cozies are becoming more inclusive in a way. There is the perception that they're all for readers above 60 and they're all protagonists who are 35 plus and there's a romantic interest and that's the extent of it. But I think people would be surprised, and your book is an excellent example of how cozies are kind of opening the door to a broader readership.
Thank you. Yes, I just think, you know, people, I mean, I said this, I always think I love stories about American experience in the 1960s. I don't know why, I'm just drawn to them. There was a wonderful television show in the 90s called I'll Fly Away, and I just loved it.
Yeah.
But I can watch that and I can like sympathize with it and empathize with it and feel. But when you read a story about someone like you, a gay man or a millennial or writer or whatever, when you can, as a reader, find some connection to them, you know, it just makes it a lot more fun. And reading, and it is lighthearted, and you know, it's somebody wrote a review and they said there's not much depth to this story. And I thought, but she also said this is her first cozy mystery. And I thought, well, okay, then get used to it, because it's fun. It's the genre. And I try to put a little depth in there, because the main reason that the couple decides to help solve this murder is because the man who dies, his boyfriend, partner, asks for their help. And they realize, well, if one of us died and they just wrote it off as an accident and there may have been some other reason, we would feel terrible. So I do try to give it, you know, a little depth in there.
Yeah, no, I think you're very good about that. And I think that's one of the key elements of the amateur sleuth and the cozy, is they have to have a reason for meddling, so to speak, in a mystery investigation, whether it's because the officials are not taking it seriously, whether they have a connection to the victim, whether they just know something that someone else doesn't. But that does come across in the book. And readers that are looking for serious things should probably be reading Dostoevsky or something like that, or not cozy mysteries.
Yeah.
Your background, academic background, is in theater writing, playwriting, and you have experience in the theater as an actor. How has that influenced your novel writing, or has it?
It has, in that I always write in first person. You know this book, so you know there are chapters that are told in third person, but they're not. It's the narrator, Peter, telling the story. So I always write it as if this book is a 300-page monologue. It's like a one-man show, and he is telling you the story. And I know they say show don't tell, but you know, some books tell, and that's what they do. But so I write everything and then I read it out loud. I'm an actor and I have to do this one-man show, and these are my words. And if I can't say what's written, or I stumble, or it sounds false, especially the dialogue, you know, I've always been complimented on my dialogue because it sounds like the way that people really talk. I use my knowledge of acting. You know, every character has a distinct voice. There are certain words that only certain characters will say. You can't put the words of one character into another character's mouth. You know, whenever I try to do that, give a line to someone else, I always end up having to rewrite it to some extent because it just doesn't sound like them. You know, you want to be able to read script. This isn't a script, but you want to be able to read the dialogue and know who exactly is saying what without any of the tags or whatever they call them. So I read everything aloud, and I use my knowledge of the dramatic structure when I write the outline and make sure I have, you know, act 1, act 2, act 3, and the beats and the conflict, and then the resolution, and then the second, you know, I use all of that to lay out the story and to try to make it as dramatic as possible, with the ulterior motive that one day I would love to take every book that I've written and turn it into some sort of dramatic, you know, cinematic adaptation, if only I would be given that opportunity.
You have written novels before in addition to plays, but this is your first mystery. Did the structure of the mystery, because you have to have a victim, you have to have clues, you have to have suspects, did that give you any challenges as a writer?
The biggest challenge, I'd say, for the cozy or the mystery in general, is, you know, you can decide who your victim's going to be, but you have to have multiple suspects. So each person has to have a reason to want that person dead. And I'm finding more and more that the victim usually is an unlikable character. I don't know if that's true for all, but how can it not be? Because if an innocent victim dies, why would 5 different people have a reason to want to kill them? So, you know, you figure out who the victim is, and then you think about your cast of characters and potential suspects, and you give each one a reason. And that's where the fun comes in, because you, as the writer, you know, you write the backstory. Well, this is their relationship, and this is how they knew each other in the past, and this is what they did, the victim did to wrong this person, you know. But the hardest part of all is plotting it out, because you got to make sure like this person was in this location at this time and this person was in that location, and it's both frustrating and fun, and I ripping my hair out, figuratively, not quite literally, but or you can write it in an outline and then you start writing it actually, and then you realize, no, that doesn't make sense, or that's not logic. It's so much logic. And I actually do write an outline, and I write it to the extent that I know every chapter on what day of the week and what time it's taking place, because you just have to, like, you can't like leave anything vague, at least for yourself. You as the writer, you need to know all of that. uh, have plot holes. And some intelligent reader, because these cozy mystery readers read lots of these books and they know how they work,
Yeah.
they will nail you.
Mm-hmm. You've written a lot, so I would be interested in hearing what kind of advice you have for aspiring writers out there. And if I remember correctly, when I was doing a bit of research, I thought you offered what was a very pragmatic piece of advice when you told another interviewer, it's not write what you know, it's who you know in the writing business.
It is. I don't have an agent. I had an agent once. They didn't, I hate to say they did nothing for me. That sounds really awful, but that's why I published 2 books on my own, because they could not get my book published, even though I had already published a book and won a Lambda Literary Award. Losing my train of thought. So the any amount of success I have, anything, even acting, I can look back on every experience that I've had. It's because I knew somebody. When I moved to New York, I did extra work on a movie. I found out my upstairs neighbor was the stunt coordinator. He talked to them. He got me on every day, got me my SAG card. I would have not gotten that if I didn't know him. So I wouldn't have a book had I not worked at Kensington Publishing and met John Scognamiello, who gave me the opportunity to write one. So to aspiring writers, I say, yes, write what you know, write what you want to write a good story. And I hate it, but you have to like network. And that's not even the right word. You just have to be a little forgiving to yourself if it doesn't quite go the way you want it, because it's not your fault. There's so much luck that's involved, Yeah. As an actor, I didn't really I say, I failed as an actor because I'm not an actor anymore. But the writer, you want to, all you have to do is like get the right person to read your stuff, and there's, how do you do that? I'm not sure, so you just have to like put it out there, send it to the one agent. If they reject it, send it to the other. If they reject it, send it to the other, because eventually one of them hopefully will like it, and then they will open the doors for you. But it has to be good. You can't just meet someone that and not deliver. Yeah. There's that too. I used to get so frustrated when you hear the stories of like Lana Turner was just sitting at a soda fountain and someone thought she was beautiful and gave, but that's, whether that's true or not, that's all it took. But if she couldn't, opened her mouth and couldn't be believable, she probably wouldn't have gotten further than she did,
Yeah, and she was probably sitting there for a long time and not just that one day when somebody walked by and saw her.
Yeah, you always hear about the overnight sensation. There's this new movie coming out about Elvis, and this kid, I read the interview, he's like in his 30s now, and it's like, they didn't call him the overnight sensation, but they're making it sound like, but he's been acting since he was like, I don't know, 10 years old or something. 25 years it's taken him to get this, leading role in this major movie, but he didn't give up. You can't give up, every rejection, I personally, every rejection, I just feel it, metaphorically cry, and then, or for real cry, and then move on. And there's a lot of things that I still would like to do. Like I said, I want to have my stories turned into movies or what have you, and it may never happen, but I feel like at least you keep moving forward, you keep trying, you keep trying, you keep trying. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to die one day, but at least you'll say, that you tried.
Yeah, I think you're right, because the worst thing people can say is no, but if you don't ask, you're never going to get yes or no.
Yeah. And I do that sometimes. I fear not failure, but I fear, like, what if they do say yes? Like, I'll say this, this is an exclusive for your podcast.
Ooh,
I've just been offered the opportunity to narrate the audiobook of Renovated to Death,
congratulations.
which I've never done before, which I've always wanted to do. I've never had an audiobook. My earlier Kensington books, they weren't turned into audiobooks. My self-pub books, of course, I didn't know how to do that, but I was told right away that this book would have an audio. And I jokingly said, oh, well, if they're looking for a narrator, I have an acting background. And John, my editor, said, put a sample on, record a sample, and we'll send it off. What's the worst that they can do? Say no. And I was really waiting for them to say no. And then they said yes. And now I'm a little nervous because now I have to do it. So now I have to read my own book and hope that I wrote it in a way that an actor, who is now me, can actually say it out loud. And it's going to make my mother very happy because, to be honest, because she keeps saying, can't you just read it to me? She's not a big fan of reading. Can't you just read it to me? And now I'll be able to do that without actually having to, sit there and actually do it. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But like, it's that thing of like, I asked for it thinking I'm not going to get, it's like House Hunters. My partner and I were on House Hunters. We applied thinking we were never going to get it, and then we got it. So stranger things happen, and but you won't get it if you don't ask. You can't be rejected if you don't ask.
That's true.
And you can't get it if you don't ask.
In addition to your writing career and your acting career, you mentioned that you had worked in publishing a bit. And I thought it was fascinating that at one point in your internship, you actually had the chance to talk to Maurice Sendak.
Yes. That story came about because, see, this goes back to who you know. When I moved to New York, I had no idea what I was going to do. I needed to get a temp job. My neighbor, my next door neighbor growing up, had lived in New York. He connected me to a temp service. They got me a job at HarperCollins Publishers, which was like the publisher of all of my favorite books growing up, including Maurice Sendak. So when I was at HarperCollins, I one day just casually strolled up to the children's book floor and made friends with one of an assistant who worked up there. And she gave me copies of the books that I didn't have. But what happened was I found Maurice Sendak's phone number in the file system. So I wrote him a letter. I would never be so bold as just call him up in Connecticut, but I wrote him a letter, again thinking nothing would come of it. Then I wish I would have known you were going to bring this up because I could show you the letter, but I got a letter in the mail from Connecticut, Maurice Sendak, and he basically told me he never writes back to children because they were just forced to write him. It was a project that their teachers made them do in school, to write him a letter. So he never writes back to children. And he wrote me this letter, and I had asked him about his story, Really Rosie, which was an animated TV movie special, if you could will, with music by Carole King that I loved growing up. And I wanted to know how that whole thing came about. So he written me this letter and he said, if you want to learn more about Really Rosie, give me a call. And he, gave me his phone number, which I already had. So we arranged this time, and I'll never forget, I was in my Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn apartment, and I was sitting on the kitchen floor on this terrazzo tile that had been there probably since the late 1800s. And I was chatting on the phone with Maurice Sendak. And he was very, I say this with love and respect, crotchety, like just very cantankerous. And this was before he came out as gay, but I could just tell talking to him that, you know, who he was. And he basically told me that Carole King did Really Rosie because Paul Simon said no. I don't know how Paul Simon would have done the voice of Really Rosie, maybe just write the music. But then he told me the story of how it was not a hit because the executives at CBS television, I believe, where it was done, thought Rosie, and I quote, was a dyke.
Oh.
They didn't like her because she was and, you know, took charge and, you know, I don't know if you want to call her a tomboy, but that is what he told. And I was just like a little taken aback by that because it wasn't what I was expecting to hear. But we just had a lovely little chat. We probably talked for half an hour, 45 minutes, and this was now almost 25 years ago. So it's sadly very fuzzy, but I just remember sitting on the floor in my kitchen on a, you know, on an actual telephone with the cord stretched, talking to Murray Sendak. And I saved the letter. I have it wrapped in a plastic baggie and it's tucked away in a private box that I have. Yeah, he's just was my childhood and I just love it.
You've talked a little bit about some of your favorite authors as a child. Do you have anything that you're recommending to readers or that's on your summer reading list this year?
Well, I will tell you that I don't read a lot when I'm writing because I end up either stealing it from the person I'm reading, or I think they're so much better and then I get really depressed and then it like, you know, it stifles me or, you know, makes me freeze up. But I have been hearing about some other cozy mysteries featuring queer and LGBTQ characters. One in particular is called The Devil's Chew Toy by Rob Osler, I believe his name is. And it's a story of, I really like it because the protagonist is described as he's short. I forget if he calls him pint-sized or what have you, but he describes him as being very short, and I'm only 5'7", so I can relate to that. But the guy, he like meets a go-go boy at a gay bar, and then like they go on a date, and then the go-go boy ends up being murdered. But there is depth in it because the go-go boy is Hispanic or Latino, and whatever, I don't want to be politically incorrect. And he was a dreamer as it brought to the country as a child. And, you know, so there's all this speculation of was he illegal and is that why he was killed and all of that. So I am looking forward to reading that one. And I will say I do read a lot of, I already said, I read a lot of YA, and I've recently gotten into graphic novels. I had never read a graphic novel. Kind of like my thinking of cozies, they're being for old ladies. I thought graphic novels were just for kids, or I say this, men who refuse to grow up, but that's me. So I don't know why I was afraid of them. But I came across a beautiful one a few months ago called Bloom by Kevin Panetta and Savannah, and I always forget her last name, but I can't discredit the artist because her drawings are beautiful. But it also led me to Heartstopper, which I'm sure everyone has heard of by now. I was so late to this bandwagon. I watched the Netflix shows before I read the book. Then I read book 1. Now I really want to read book 2, 3, and 4 because it's just such a beautiful story. If anyone doesn't know about it, you know, it's a graphic novel about young gay boys in Britain, and it's just beautifully told. And it captures the childhood that I never had. And I cry at every episode. And the books are just, they're not literally the TV show, but they're written. The author wrote both. And you can just see where one came from the other. And then there's another one that I've heard about that I haven't read called Small Town Pride, I believe is the name. And it's by, I have it here on my phone because I didn't want to forget it. Small Town Pride by Phil Stamper. And it's a middle grade novel. And again, I love middle grade. Judy Blume is my favorite middle grade writer. I still read her books once a year. to this day. But this is a story of a young middle school age, though I'm guessing he's 11 or 12, gay boy, the first in his town, a small conservative town in Ohio. And he and his friend decide they're going to have the first Pride month or day Pride event in this town. And of course, there's, they run into setbacks and discrimination and what have you. But again, it's like, I just can't even believe, like, I try to put myself in that position. Yes, I was gay when I was in middle school, but no one knew. Everyone knew, but I wasn't out. And I just love the idea of these stories about where being gay is not the conflict, or at least it's not the inner conflict. It's not about coming out and self-hating and being ashamed of who you are. It's about being proud of who you are and wanting to celebrate it. And then maybe some other people have issues. That's what it was. Another thing was fun about writing Renovated to Death is I just wrote this gay couple, but that was just a fact, it wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
And that was kind of nice, where I didn't have to oh, I don't want to be this way. I hate myself. Why doesn't anyone like me? When will I ever change? Which was everything else I'd written before. But from a very, true place, of course.
Renovated to Death is the first in a series, if I understand correctly. Can we expect another installment?
Yes, I'm finishing it now. I was actually working on it before our chat because my deadline's passed and I'm trying to get it done. It's called Rehearsed to Death. And in the story, PJ, the writer, has a play that's being produced at the local community theater. His partner, JP, the actor, is going to be starring in it. And they're on hiatus from the TV show. I find a lot of readers want more of this TV show, and I just feel like the TV show is more like sort of their job, their real job, but that's not what's important to the story. So they're on hiatus from the TV show. They're doing this play. Right from the get-go, things do not go well when the director shows up half an hour late for their first time meeting. Once they do meet him, he's from New York. He's very pompous. He's British. He immediately, lays out what's wrong with the play and what needs to be fixed and how PJ, the writer, needs to change everything. And then, dead. So, and then we find out, of course, lots of people, not just Peter, the playwright, have reasons to not want to see this man living any longer. But again, it's fun and it's lighthearted, and it was fun for me because I haven't really been involved in the theater in many years, and I got to use that knowledge and tell that story. And I actually, I say this, and maybe my editor won't be listening, but the play they're doing in the book is a play that I wrote. It's a play by Frank Anthony Polito, and I put in bits of dialogue taken from the actual script. My editor knows the play because he actually saw it when we did it in New York, and I didn't want him to, tell me that I couldn't self-promote my own play, but that was fun, So anyone who knows me, who knows the play that I had written or had seen it, will know that, oh, this sounds vaguely familiar. I changed the title to protect the guilty, me, but it's the same characters, the same story. And because as a writer, you don't want to just, especially with a play, so hard to get produced. And a lot of times it gets produced once and then no one else wants to do it because all these theaters, they want a world premiere, and your play just ends up getting shoved into a drawer on your computer, or a literal drawer, never to see the light of day again. And so at least I got to put it out there, and maybe someone will read the book and think, this sounds like an interesting play. Would you send me the script? Why not? If you don't put it out there, they can't say no or yes.
True. Speaking of day jobs, I read somewhere that you had another job, and this might not be correct, that you were a mobile story game director.
Yes, I
have no idea what that is.
There are games that you play on your phone.
Oh.
Mostly young girls, women, and I'm assuming gay boys. And they're story games. They're sort of like the choose your own adventure stories that they had when I was growing up. So like a cozy mystery, they're always not anymore because renovated to death and the others, but they're about a young girl or a teenage girl or a woman in her mid-20s or whatever. And there's always a love interest or three. And you literally watch it. It's like a little animated movie. You tap on your phone, you read the dialogue, and then you'll get to a point where it's like, what do I want to wear? A cute such and such kind of dress or this, and then you get to choose. And then you'll get to a point where, which boy should I go out with? Joe or Fred, and then if you pick Joe, you see what happens on the date with Joe. And if you pick Fred, you see what happens on the date with Fred. And usually it's the same exact thing. It's just different characters. So as the director, what I would do is type in all of this coding that when you hit play, makes you see all of that. So someone else writes the story, all the coding. I actually got into it because I took my Banfag story book, and in that story, the gay boy has a friend who's a pretty girl who's a cheerleader. And so I adapted it so the story was more about her. And so I wrote it and then I directed it. And then the company I was working for thought my directing work was, I won't say better than my writing work, but they thought it was really good. So they gave me this opportunity and it just went from there. And I've done that off and on now for like 5 or 6 years. And it's just really fun for me. It's nice to finally have a job where it's fun and you get paid. It's like writing. I would probably do that job for free just because it's fun. But, someone has to pay. Yeah, and someone has to pay for the antique furniture that I keep buying on the online auctions.
Before we run out of time, how can readers learn more about you and your books? What social media platforms are you on? Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's frankanthonypolito.com. I will say that it's mostly just like a bio in my picture and a link to my books and stuff. Because I'm not despite being able to code for mobile games, I'm not really a website designer. Then of course, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and Facebook are at Frank Anthony Polito, all 3 names. Twitter is at FA Polito because Frank Anthony Polito is too long for a Twitter name. But you know what? I just say, like, type my name in the Google bar and you'll find something. And I would love to hear from people because I really do like to hear from readers. I like to connect from readers. My earlier books, I would get messages from guys my age or younger gay men who would, say, I read your book and you really captured what I was feeling, or I did that too, or what have you. So if you read this book and you and your partner have renovated an historic house and you did find a dead body at the bottom of a staircase, I would love to hear what your experience is. But truthfully, I would love to, I hate hearing what people don't like, but I like to hear it because then I know, like, if I agree with it, how I can fix it.
Yeah.
And I got some feedback on Renovated to Death early on that I used to go into rehearse to death before I finished it and clean up some stuff and try to make it clearer. Like those chapters that we talked about that were people thought were in third person and they were confused by. I went in and I made sure that now that this is PJ, the narrator, telling the story of scenes that he was not in, but now that he knows about because it's in the past, and now he's telling it. So whoever, the people who pointed that out, who were confused and only gave me 4 stars instead of 5 because they were confused, thank you, because now I hope my next book will be even better.
I can't believe we're already out of time. It's just been a delight having author Frank Anthony Polito, whose new book is Renovated to Death, here at the Poison Pen virtually. Thank you for listening in to another virtual author chat. Thank you, Frank, for being here. And I look forward to your next book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.